On today's episode of the Nerd Byword, we are getting marvelous with special guest Maria Akhtar as we talk about the issue limited series that just wrapped up, Ms. Marvel on Disney Plus. Welcome into another all-exclusive episode of the Nerd Byword. On today's episode, we have a fantastic discussion with TikTok creator Maria Akhtar, who herself is a Muslim Pakistani woman and offers really, really great perspective in our Byword Big Talk on what it means to feel represented in media like this and positive representation. But first, it is time for... Dave, I just had to throw my head back in laughter when I saw this.
Yeah, it's like the never-ending story at this part. So,
but not a good one.
Yeah, I wish to be. I like the never-ending story.
I do too.
Yeah, and not just the movie, like the book that it's based on. I'm a big fan. So, but this never-ending story is just like frustrating. I think over the last couple of years of podcasting here, I don't think I've really made a secret out of the fact that the Zack Snyder vision of DC superheroes is not really for me, and that's perfectly fine. Different strokes for different folks. There's plenty of people who liked it, and that too is fine. However, it's also pretty clear that there has been a very toxic movement that has developed around this director's vision for these heroes. First with the hashtag release the Snyder Cut, and now currently with the hashtag restore the Snyderverse. And there's a lot of toxicity coming from that camp, with Warner execs being bullied on social media and all sorts of stuff like that. What makes it fascinating, though, is that now Rolling Stone actually recently released a exclusive in-depth look at the rise of the Snyder Cut online movement. And it turns out that the big headline is that fake accounts fueled the Snyder Cut online army. Somewhere up to 13% of the people posting on social media about the Snyder Cut were bots. And in fact, the report goes further when Snyder won some awards, fan favorite awards that were fan voted on at the last Oscars, that those wins were also likely fueled by bots. Obviously there are real people involved here, and people who feel passionate about these movies and act like total ding-dongs online. As the report points out, and I quote, "Fans went after anyone or anything deemed a danger to the so-called Snyderverse, including directors like Adam Wingard, whose Godzilla vs. Kong launched on HBO Max 13 days after the Snyder Cut and stole some of its thunder, and movies like Wonder Woman 1984. Basically, the onslaught included cyber harassment so severe Warner Brothers security division got involved." So this is a pretty, toxic movement, but it's interesting that part of it was fueled by, bots. What I find even more interesting, though, in this article is that there is some circumstantial evidence that the beginnings of this movement may actually have been generated by a marketing firm with a website that is sort of credited with starting the whole Snyder Cut movement, actually being at one point registered to a now defunct marketing firm. So there is some speculation, who hired this marketing firm that, jumpstart this movement? Was Snyder personally involved? Did he actually hire somebody to get this started? It's interesting that the origins of the movement may be manufactured. Bots are involved, so some of the victories of the movement are manufactured. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the article is also very clear that behind the scenes, every single cut that Snyder turned in at slightly over 2 hours, 2 hours, 30 minutes, and so on and so forth, trying to get his movie finished and released to theaters, is repeatedly described as unwatchable and joyless. So, would I say the final Snyder cut that we got, this 4-hour behemoth, was unwatchable? No. I think it's watchable for sure. Was it joyless? Yeah, pretty much. So maybe the execs had a point there. But the takeaway from this big investigation is that this fandom movement is pretty, partially manufactured by a marketing firm, potentially used bots to get their big victories, and continues to be a toxic little stain on the social media community. So, Kris, your thoughts?
Okay. So, it's really fascinating because I'm as someone who is getting more and more heavily involved in DC Comics themselves and is a fan of DC content. Like, this is incredibly frustrating because, like, my innate nature as a Marvel fan, first and foremost, is trying to give them the benefit of the doubt and not do a side-by-side comparison with the MCU. But, we're recording this a couple of weeks ahead of time. So as of the time of this recording, we just saw the Warner Brothers DCEU presentation in Hall H yesterday. And then we saw the Marvel Studios. And it's just perplexing. And I don't want like a side-by-side exact replica of the MCU in the DC film universe. But it's baffling to me how self-inflicted these wounds are for Warner Brothers, for the DCEU, in that part of the reason that connected film universe or any of those film franchises cannot progress is because they are beholden to a movement and to a creative whatever that is determined to be long gone. And they can't make that executive decision and say, you know what, Zack Snyder, thanks for playing, game over, it's time to move forward with these new projects. When your entire presentation is built around just two films, one of which has been in the works for 10 to 15 years in Black Adam, like it's finally going to be released this year. And while I'm excited about it, it's just like, okay, that's great. Shazam, I love the first movie. Super excited about the second one. More on that in a soon to come episode. But I mean, what are we even doing here? We can't progress forward while we're constantly looking backward on a creator that you admitted you no longer have any interest in working with in the future. And now we get the news that Zack Snyder is going to show up in the Teen Titans Go, which maybe it's just like a cute little self-referential, self-deprecating joke or whatever. But I mean, like, at some point we have to move on. The Snyder Cut, it's a 4-hour piece of media that exists. And I know that social media is the place where nuance goes to die. So you will find these rampant defenders that say it's an absolute masterpiece. And then there are elements of it that I enjoyed. But for the large part, it's just like the same thing through different Instagram filters. Like, I get it. I didn't need 4 hours of it. But no matter how you feel about Zack Snyder's Justice League, the Snyder Cut, all of this, it's time to move on. The original thoughts behind the beginnings of the Justice League happened over 5 years ago. We're done. It's time to move on. It's 2022. We have to pick up the pieces and move on. And the most successful DC film franchise, we had to go to a completely different universe in order to get that to happen in the Batman. We had to go Earth 2 or whatever they want to call it just to escape the clutches of Snyderdom. It's like, nobody is in the right here. I am not caping up for Warner Brothers. I'm not caping up for Snyder and company. Everybody, get your shit together and let's move on.
It's funny too, because you mentioned the Shazam trailer, which just recently was released as we're recording this. And it was a very cool little trailer. I mean, questionable music choice perhaps, but otherwise, from what we've seen, it looks really good. And then you go on social media and the Snyder bots swarm, the comments on this trailer and basically say, hey, look, they used a shot from the Snyder cut of, Ben Affleck's Batman. And I'm like, I don't care. Like that's your takeaway. We have a 2-minute trailer for a movie that is a tonally completely different ball game from, what Zack Snyder created in his cut, love it or hate it. And your only takeaway is, oh, look, there's a shot of Ben Affleck as Batman. Snyderverse returns or something. Like, no, it's just some old footage that they were using for the trailer. It's a very... you were exactly right. I think, sitting here listening to you, the best thing that anybody has ever said about this whole Snyder Cut situation and the Snyderverse and all that stuff is just, let's move on. Let's let, DC movies flourish. Let's hope that Black Adam is good, that the new Shazam is good, that they get their act together and start, making some good movies. Warner, I'll let you know right now, I'm available to write some movies for you if you'd like. I have a great Martian Manhunter pitch. I got a great pitch on The Question. You just let me know and we'll make some movies together. I have some magic for you here. But yeah, it's just time to move forward. DC is, and you and I have talked about this, the entire time that we've done this podcast. DC is my favorite. I love a lot of stuff that Marvel does, but the DC heroes is where I feel at home. And I am, frustrated that, all we really get is continuously good Batman movies and everything else just kind of falls to the wayside, And I was thrilled with the Batman. It was a great movie. But the DC universe is so rich and has so many different things going on. I would love to see a truly great Superman movie once, sure. But I'd also like to see a Black Canary movie or a Birds of Prey movie that's actually about the Birds of Prey and not Harley Quinn. I'd love to see The Question in action or Martian Manhunter. There are so many good properties that DC has, and they would lend themselves to great adaptations. And I feel you're exactly right. We're we're caught in this quagmire of every time that DC and Warner tries to make a move, it's like the Snyder bots just swarm the situation and are extremely negative because their Lord and Savior Zack Snyder's not involved, and that's just not a way to be, man. It's just let's move on, okay? I mean, if they have no plans to work with Snyder right now for the time being, then for crying out loud, let's focus on getting some good DC properties into theaters. I'm looking forward to Blue Beetle, my man, and Batgirl. Yeah. That is some stuff that I'm psyched about, and I don't need Zack Snyder for that. The Blue Beetle series, the first one with Jaime Reyes, was one of my favorite things ever. And I'm a huge Barbara Gordon fan, and I'm just absolutely excited to see where this stuff goes. So let's move forward, guys.
And that was almost my nerd news story for this week, that the Blue Beetle just wrapped up filming, and I can't be more excited about that. And I mean, look at this, and I know we're getting ahead of ourselves, but look at the mess. You had San Diego Comic-Con, the biggest nerd mecca event, returning for the first time in 2 years, and your next upcoming release is supposed to be The Flash. But we heard absolute crickets about this film. There was no presentation because you've attached yourself to Ezra Miller and this kind of fan service. So in a way, while trying to progress, WB is also kind of giving a little cadence and a little time to the Snyder of it all, and attaching this entire film around a Snyder recruit. And how has that turned out for you? You have, as what all would seem, an absolute maniac in the starring role, whose personal problems are overshadowing everything surrounding the film, to the point where, are they even going to release it? And I think the biggest discovery for me, you mentioned that the Batman of it all, is, yeah, I'm a Batman fan. I grew up on Batman the Animated Series. That's fun. But then, in diving into DC Comics, I've discovered an entire new world that I was never subjected to because the only character they want to trot out time after time after time after time is Batman. And so, like, it's been such a pleasant surprise reading actual DC Comics and discovering all these wonderful worlds and characters and settings that was never exposed to me. And the fact that they are still just like can't seem to get it right, all the while, like, HBO Max original content that has nothing to do with this connected universe is just fantastic. Harley Quinn is one of my favorite shows in the last several years. And I know that we haven't officially made that a nerd commendation, but, like, good God, we nerd commend it now. Like, Harley Quinn is so good and does not get near enough love because we can't seem to move on from this.
So after some consideration, I think let's move on from this. So
we need to move on.
Let's get some. Yeah, we talked about the Snyder Cut in our very first episode. It's like the recurring nightmare, not with a K. So let's go ahead and move on. Kris, do you have some positive news for us this week?
Yeah, dude, this is right up your alley. Surprised it wasn't your news story, but with that whopper, we're getting more Gargoyles content. And so with the advent of Disney Plus, one of my all-time favorite shows, one of the formative shows of my childhood, and I know it's yours. We've talked about it extensively on the show before, but Gargoyles is coming back. Not in the animated medium yet, but Dynamite Comics, a really under-the-radar, underappreciated comic book publisher, is bringing back Gargoyles as a comic book series. And this is not the first time that Gargoyles has been made a comic. Marvel did it back in the day while it was on, while the show was running. But details are very sparse on this. But Dynamite did reveal that the show's creator, Greg Weisman, is going to help run the title. And it is picking up where the animated series left off. Now, Weisman did an 18-issue comic run for Slave Labor Comics in 2006. And as I previously mentioned, Marvel had an 11-issue run back in the day while the show was going. But Weisman says that is non-canonical. So details are very scarce, but Gargoyles has seen like a second life here with the Disney Plus release and the show being on there. You even had the greatest of all voice actors of all time, Keith David, the voice behind Goliath, said he would absolutely love to return to the role. So hopefully this is the first sign of things to come with the Gargoyles franchise, Dave.
Yeah, so we can talk extensively about this one if you want, but the short of it is that Gargoyles is probably one of the greatest series ever made. As far as, a children's program with depth, with complex characters. Heck, a lot of stuff that I love about Shakespeare's plays, I was first introduced to via, Gargoyles because they extensively reference, Shakespeare plays, which I think is one of the coolest things that you can possibly do in a children's cartoon and actually make it work for kids. So the first two seasons were overseen by Greg Weisman. The third season, I think, which is usually referred to as Goliath Chronicles, was not. So usually 90% of the time when Greg Weisman is involved in trying to get a new project off the ground, he always wants to ignore that season. In fact, Slave Labor Graphics, SLG, that series, which I have sitting in trade on my shelf, there's two trades called Clan Building, was written actually by Weisman himself and ignored the Goliath Chronicles and picked up where his original first two seasons left off. So my guess is if there's a contractual thing with if you want me back, then we need to ignore this. I would not be surprised if Dynamite ignores that as well. I think it's regrettable if the Slave Labor Graphics thing is considered non-canonical because Weisman wrote it himself, and it is really solid and a lot of fun. Dynamite, it does you really, really good work with licensed properties. I'm particularly fond of all the work they've done with Red Sonja, a series that I never thought I would, be interested in, and Dynamite really made it work. They did some very cool stuff with Zorro, actually, and we've talked about that before. So, I'm very, very excited to see what they do with this, and I will definitely pick this up. Dynamite, give me a online subscription service, please, like DC Universe Infinite, because I'm not really reading much floppies anymore, and I'd really like to read this. So, like, can we do something about that? Like, soon.
Comixology, dude. Yeah, they have some stuff on there.
Some stuff. That's the problem. Always Comixology is like whetting your appetite and then making you pay more.
It's very smart. It's very smart. It's very smart. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So yeah, I'm totally hyped for this, man. I love Gargoyles.
All right, that wraps up nerd news for this week. When we come back from this, our first break, Maria Akhtar comes and lends her expertise on Ms. Marvel, our beloved Kamala Khan. All right, welcome back to this week's Meat and Potatoes segment, better known as our Byword Big Talk. And we are so fortunate to be to have a special guest with us. Maria, thank you so much for joining us this week. You can find her on TikTok at Call Me By This Name. Maria has been a wealth of knowledge on the context surrounding South Asian descent and Muslim identity around the Ms. Marvel show to this character that we've just fallen head over heels in love with. So Maria, thank you so much for coming on the Byword today.
Oh, no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate everyone listening. It means a lot.
Okay, so we always like to start with our guest's nerd origin story. What were the first pieces of like nerd or pop culture that you fell in love with and you woke up and realized I'm kind of nerdy?
Okay, so nerd Marvel or nerd like in life?
Whatever. Go
okay,
with
because
whatever.
Marvel's a whole story in itself, but like I grew up loving Sailor Moon and X-Men and Batman like since I was like 5 years old. So I moved from Pakistan when I was like 2 years old. My dad actually didn't teach me English because he was just like, oh, you're going to learn that in life. So I learned English through X-Men and Batman movie TV shows.
Oh, wow.
And I've never read I've read the DC comics, but basically just like the nerd origin started from there. I got into fandoms to Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings afterwards. And then superheroes were more like my teenage years, I would say. And then my adult years has been more like Game of Thrones and Marvel. But I just have always loved escaping through my imagination. Like I've just had this tendency to always daydream, much like Kamala Khan. So I have just always loved other universes and just world building and multiverses and just like getting wrapped in that is like what I've always wanted. So that is what kind of started all of it. And then Marvel built a world in front of our eyes. I'm not sure if you grew up with Marvel, with the MCU. Yeah. Since Iron Man 1, I just saw all of the movies from back to back to back. So like seeing the world build and expand and like to what it is now, that now we have like a Jersey Spider-Man version. It's just been so cool to like be part of it. So I guess that's my origin story, but
yeah.
But mostly it's just been my whole life.
You're right. So you teased this a little bit, but are there any other fandoms that you're really into?
Well, I recently just started watching Star Wars. So this is actually a fun thing about my TikTok. So I'm a TV. Oh, I should have mentioned, I love television. I wanted to be like a screenwriter, but I went into medicine because that's so similar. But I love television. Like I grew up watching TV and like sitcoms. So like my brain has always loved TV. And I started out with like making TV content on TikTok, but loving Marvel and loving the Marvel series, I met a lot of Star Wars fans. So I've actually never watched Star Wars till this year. And I decided to watch all of the Star Wars movies and now the shows literally in the past like 6 months, I think.
Oh my
God. So it's like the new fandom that I love. Like I watched it and I was like, no, it's going to be all right. And I fell in love with it. So Star Wars is a new fandom. But Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings, DC, Marvel, Sailor Moon, basically you name it, I'm probably interested in it.
Okay, so that segues perfectly into the next question because you made your intentions clear with Anakin Skywalker's name in your bio on TikTok. So this is much more context. Okay, so coming out of have you watched all of Kenobi?
I have.
So you have a very different perspective because for longtime fans, we see Hayden Christensen like triumphant return, a shot at redemption for whatever happened with those prequels and the script writing. So what's your perspective on all of this with Kenobi?
I'm so happy you asked, because I got deep into it. So whenever I was growing up in high school, that's when the prequels came out. And I was a teenager when Hayden Christensen. So I still was really aware of who he was, even though I wasn't into Star Wars. And I mean, because I loved all the other fandoms, I obviously associated with a lot of Star Wars fans. So I remember my friends always being like, you have to like Star Wars. So I was like, wait, who's that? Who's Anakin Skywalker? So I've always had a crush on Hayden Christensen. And this is another reason why, like, I kind of lean into the Anakin Skywalker really hard, is just because of the crush on Hayden Christensen. It's more of like a running joke than a apologist. It's more of like a, oh, Anakin's really hot. He's a terrible person, though.
Right.
But, you know, so I don't want that to be twisted. But yeah, no, I'm really happy that, because I heard another thing about like loving all these fandoms is like the culture of fandoms is very interesting, especially with social media nowadays, because I think the internet culture has made fandom culture discourse very prevalent. So like you're really aware of things. So I heard about all the bullying and all the commentary about the sequels actually first, and then I heard about the prequels because I was watching it. So like it's been very interesting to hear from this perspective, because watching the prequels now, I understand that they're different, but I don't think they're bad. I just thought that like they're different. And even the sequels, I actually really liked them, but I know that there was a lot of bullying associated with the sequels. So I have, and now I've been noticing with the MCU. So it's really interesting to see how, I'm really happy that Hayden came back and was able to get a second chance. But I do think the culture of bullying and hating, it's more to do with the fandom and like the expectations that you get from years of like building things up and then getting it and not being happy, rather than the actual quality of the work, if that makes sense.
I would be remiss as a starch advocate for them if I didn't ask you, have you done the animated series yet?
The Clone Wars?
The Clone Wars, and my favorite Rebels. I love Rebels.
Oh, I haven't seen Rebels yet, because I think I have to watch Clone Wars first, right?
Right.
Yeah, so right. Clone Wars is a lot. So I just started Clone Wars. I think I'm on the second season. So
it picks up. It starts really, really slow, and then I personally am the president, CEO, and founder of the Ahsoka Tano fan club.
Oh, I love her.
She's everything to me.
I'm so excited about the show. Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh, yeah. So that's going to mean a lot more when you get to Rebels, because you get grown up. You get grown up Ahsoka, and she's kind of like serving in the mentor role. And I don't want to spoil anything for you when you get to Rebels, but Rebels is just premium content.
Okay. I've heard really good things about it. It's just because there's been so much to watch lately.
Yes.
And I'm like catching up. So I was watching Clone Wars. In May, there was less to watch. So I was watching Clone Wars then. And then Obi-Wan started, then Miss Marvel started. And like since then, I've just been playing catch up. So once there's like some down, like right now, I guess I could watch Clone Wars again for sure.
Okay, so now to transition to the star of our show, the reason we're gathered here together, Ms. Kamala Khan.
Yes.
What was your relationship with that character prior to this show?
I'm so glad you asked. So I haven't read any of the Marvel comics, but I have heard of her before I was aware that they were going to make a series. And obviously it was very fascinating, because I was like, this is the first Pakistani Muslim teenager from Jersey superhero in the Marvel universe. And I know that her comic book, her history kind of started out just a few years ago. So I feel like if I were to read a Marvel comic book, it would be that series. And I was actually considering starting it, but it's a little overwhelming to start comic books when you don't know where to begin with. So I have researched almost everything I could about her and like looked up and read a lot of stories. Like I read how she told her mother, I read the origin of her name, all of these side storylines. But basically I was very aware of her, but haven't read the comics basically. And whenever I got the chance to watch, I got to see the episodes early, like pre-release. So once that came to me, I was like, okay, you know what? I think I'm just going to watch the show as a medium by itself, and then I'll read the comics. So I've always been a huge fan, and I've always been interested. My history with her is very much like I'm aware of her, have a lot of plans to read the book, comics, and just like get into the character more and more as I go.
Yeah, I totally agree with, like, I came late to comic books. I had, as a fan of mutants, I called them flat scan parents. My parents were not nerdy at all. The extent of my parents' nerddom was my dad took me in the 90s when they re-released Star Wars. He took me to Empire Strikes Back 20 minutes late. And
wow. Okay.
So like, it was all just a mess. I had no nerdy influence, and now I see, like even myself, like mentoring my own children of like, hey, this is some cool stuff you might want to check out. It's like, man, I wish I would have had this back in the day. But so I didn't get to start comics until like my 20s. And then so I say all that to say this, I highly recommend something like Marvel Unlimited. Not only for the sheer volume of tens or hundreds of thousands of comics at your disposal, but they also have these reading lists when you log into the app, and it's really smartly done. Like right now, Ms. Marvel's hot as a hot character. The show's out. They're like, you want to start reading Ms. Marvel? Here are 5 different jumping on points.
That's great, because it's definitely so overwhelming.
Yeah, but the OCD completionist that I am, as a Peter Parker fan, I read all 800 plus issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Like I'm incorrigible like that. And
I love it. Yeah, that's great. Yeah. If you're gonna do it, you might as well go hard, right?
Like, so I'm really bad for like when I start a series and I don't understand something. I was like, there's got to be a prior series, so I'll go back and read that, and then go back and read the previous one, and then it's just a never-ending game.
No, that's how I am too. Like once I start, because like for example, like I was, not to bring up Game of Thrones and like divert, but like whenever I started the Game of Thrones series,
please do. Just don't talk about the last season. My fingers are crossed with House of the Dragon.
Yeah, because it's coming up. I didn't realize how soon it's
in a couple weeks.
Yeah. So when I started Game of Thrones, I wasn't aware that they were books. So like obviously I got the books right away, but I was Googling everything because I'm like, I need to know more right now. There's like so much backstory. So I'm really excited for House of the Dragon because this is the backstory I've been waiting for years. So I completely get that.
Yeah, high fantasy nerds are going to be eating great because we've got House of the Dragon coming up, and then the Lord of the Rings show on Amazon Prime.
I know. It's a busy summer. Like there's so much going on. There's been back-to-back great stuff. So.
And by the time this episode releases, I'll be back in school teaching. And so I'll just be confined to after school hours.
Yeah, it's okay. I have to go back to studying too. So I'm like, this is my last week of like hurrah. And then I'm like back to study mode. So I get it.
Yes. So what is your reaction to the change in Kamala's power set? You kind of have an interesting perspective on that simply because you weren't necessarily deep in the comics lore, but I'm sure you heard the buzz around it.
Yeah. So I do have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this, actually, because her original power comes with a really amazing storyline, which is the fact that her power allowed her to transform into anything. And a Muslim Pakistani brown girl decided to become a white blonde girl because of this power. And like I think the power and that origin story, and I this is just from reading about this, I think the story was more powerful than the power itself because it shows that like her rejecting her own identity to be something that she's trying to assimilate to, only for her to realize that she is enough on her own, is a very beautiful story of the immigrant child growing up in America, learning to accept themselves while living here. This is a classic story that you don't hear enough, and especially from a female's perspective. So like I am very tied to that original story. I really wanted to see that storyline as well. And I think a lot of people that were like very like set on her losing that story, that is why, because they identified so much with that story. And I've talked to a lot of female creators since then, and they're like, yeah, I really wish that story was still part of it. But at the same time, I really respect and enjoyed what they did do with her power set. So I find both stories very equally important. And I was a little confused with her. I am a little confused with her power set.
Yeah, I'm still a little, yeah.
Yeah, like I do think the Inhuman storyline and that story kind of helps her figure out what her, like how her power was work in the comics. Whereas the show is still trying to figure it out. Like I mean, we have an idea of what they are. We just don't know the origin yet, I would say, maybe, because there's the bracelet and there's the family. She might be a mutant now. Like, spoiler alert. Sorry if you guys haven't seen it yet. But,
I mean, you're listening to a reaction about the show. So.
Well, oops, if you hadn't heard that. So I think the confusion still remains, but I think the story is still powerful. So my thing was, as long as they don't erase how important her immigrant story is and the assimilation story, and I don't think they did that at all. I think they did it very well. Like, they didn't just make it about the power, but they also did it by her clothing, by her own, like, personality. It just kind of changed in the series. So it's different. It's confusing, but I'm okay with it, basically.
I think they took an alternate path to it. I think with the absolute debacle that was the Inhumans ABC show.
I've heard about that.
They did not want to touch that with a 39.5-foot pole.
Yeah.
But
Let me tell you, I asked what happened with the Inhumans on TikTok. I had never gotten so many 3-minute stitches about a question. Like 3 minutes of people just explaining. So a lot has clearly happened with Inhumans. So I get that they wanted to avoid that for sure.
So being a person of South Asian descent, particularly Pakistani yourself, you offer a truly unique perspective. It came across my For You page, and I was immediately like, I've always been like, as a white guy, like I've always like thrived on seeing other perspectives and point of views that I could never ascertain on my own. And so, how do you feel in terms of representation in this show?
I feel very happy with it. Mostly because like I think for many reasons, like the fact that it exists the way it did has never actually happened before. And I want to emphasize that just not in the MCU, just the fact that it exists in the MCU is amazing and a huge step for the MCU, and I'm very, very proud that the MCU took this step. But just like as someone who loves television and who has like consumed media for the past like 15 years of her life, good Muslim representation does not exist like this. Good South Asian representation does not exist like this, particularly for a female. So the fact that it did, and that it's been new waves. Like for one thing, it's been validating for me because I see my story on screen, but the connection other people have felt with it, how they've reached out and been like, I identify with this time. When Nakia was talking about how she has a hard time like identifying herself and she's in the middle, I can understand this. Or like some sort of with a partition story, people going into their past and like identifying with it. And then on top of that, people saying this is the first time I've heard the word Allahu Akbar said in a positive light. It's just been really overwhelming with a lot of joy that like so many people, it's one thing to see it yourself and then feel the type, it help you like assimilate and kind of come to terms with your own feelings with it. But then to hear other people change their perspective, it's just been super overwhelming how amazing it's been.
Yeah, I have cousins who, one of whom is biracial, of Lebanese descent, and then
Okay.
the other is of Iraqi descent. And they were kind of born in and around like the 9/11 era, and so
Yeah.
it was incredibly difficult for them growing up, in small town like Midwest, and
Yeah.
it was really troublesome. So I'm not sure. I haven't touched base with them if they've checked this out, but like I can imagine like how difficult it's been in media representation.
It's because again, so as someone who consumes media, like this was the whole point of good representation, was that there was only bad representation for the longest time. So like this is huge. This is like a big step, and I think that's why like my whole emphasis of making content was just like, this is bigger than us. Like, this is bigger than the Marvel show. This is bigger than nerd culture. This is like a big thing happening, and that's what kind of it compelled me to speak about it, because like it's kind of getting out of my comfort zone with my normal content, but it felt too important not to talk about.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. With my background in foreign language, and being bilingual is Spanish, and Spanish owing this enormous debt of gratitude to Arabic, and so seeing phrases like Allahu Akbar in a positive light is something that I've been screaming from rooftops. It feels like for
Oh,
decades.
that's
I'm
amazing.
come on,
Yeah.
like you see these words like in Spanish, like the subjunctive, for
Uh-huh.
example, is ojalá, and it comes from like oh Allah. I'm like,
Oh
come
no
on,
way! I
guys.
didn't know that. That's so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah.
I love hearing that, because like I think I don't know if you saw my videos about explaining Kamala's name, but like
Hmm.
there's a deep connection with the South Asian like Sanskrit and Hindi languages to Middle Eastern languages like Arabic, but in between Persian and like um, actually there's so many different languages in between. So to hear there's a Spanish origin, it's really cool. I just love hearing how like languages come together like this.
It's probably like my nerdiest of nerddoms is
I'm right
language.
there with
Like
you.
like my Duolingo is despicable.
Oh no
Like
way.
I've taught Spanish for the last 11 years. I'm transitioning into a new position this year, but for the past 11 years I've taught Spanish, and so like I have Duolingo accounts for all my students. But then they're like, "Let me see your Duolingo." You're like, "Oh yeah, talk your talk, whatever." So then like I show them mine, and I have like 15 different languages just because I'm obsessed. Like I want to
Yeah.
learn it all.
Oh
And
my gosh,
so
that's so cool. Yeah, no, I love that.
yeah. The mythology, particularly something that was interesting to me, surrounding the jinn, can often be utilized as a trope or a negative stereotype for stories involving Muslim characters. How did you feel that it was handled here?
So I will say that like I did say very positive comments throughout the show, but I do have there are certain the road to representation is progress, right? So there are going to be choices that you wish they did differently. I really wish they handled the Jin angle differently, because since the show's come out, I've been very aware of the Jin trope more so in other stories. I'm not sure if you've heard of the show What We Do in the Shadows.
Yes.
The Taika Waititi show.
I love Taika.
Okay, perfect. Well,
I'm a Taika super fan. I'm actually finishing up season 3 right now, starting season 4.
Oh, okay. Well, I won't say anything about. Okay, I won't say anything. I'm just not gonna say anything. but there's a Jin. Let's put it that way. And when the season 4, so I was catching up on season 4, and I saw the Jin, and I was like, what? And I was like, oh, okay. And then I was like thinking about how The Witcher also had a Jin angle, and like it is definitely a trope that I forgot existed. But the thing is that Jin also exists in the Islamic religion and Islamic culture. So it's difficult to bring in an Islamic character where her religion is a big part of her identity and her superhero-dom, and then add the Jin angle. And then they do it in such a flimsy way. Like they add it, and then they have the one character say, but it's not like that. And then they just erase it, but then they do have it here and there. And I just feel like
contextual building at all.
Yeah, I feel like it was handled. I think the way they handled it, they didn't need to add it for one thing. And I almost feel like when they added it, they did it very carelessly when it comes to the actual religious context. And then the way they went about it was very flimsy. So I'm a little frustrated. It's the best way to say it.
Right. It was like a one-line type of thing, and they really didn't follow up on it.
But then they didn't know what to do with it. Like they just kept it around so it lingered. So I wish they would have just. I get that like they were trying to assimilate what she could be in the religion and the culture and in the universe, but at the same time, it's like they were such. When it comes to representation, they made sure that all the creators, the writers, the producers were so knowledgeable. So I'm very surprised that this was still chosen to happen.
So Marvel Studios has somewhat hemmed and hawed and kind of retracted in the past when it comes to intersectionality of films and programs. Yeah, we're looking at you, Falcon and Winter Soldier. Sorry, just call a spade a spade. Yeah. But I felt that the inclusion of the partition in this show was much more powerful and impactful. How did you feel about that?
Oh, yeah. And this is why I brought up the background representation. It's because it was done very, very well. It was done very well. And so I am also a Bollywood nerd. I grew up watching Bollywood movies. I come from a Pakistani family that loves Pakistani dramas. So I recognize all the actors and actresses in that episode and in the show. And I know for a fact that they use people because a lot of those actors are writers. So I know that and Bollywood and Pakistani dramas do partition stories so well because that's all they've been writing since like the media was created. So they made sure that they wrote it by the people that know how to write it. And I think they did beautifully. Like they made sure that the authentic feeling of what it's like to hear about it was there, for me at least. And from what I've heard from the general like consensus, that everyone could feel how palpable the pain and like trauma was for that time.
Okay, I'm gonna shoehorn a question in here because my biggest takeaway from this show is Zenobia Shroff or Modiba, please just adopt me. Please be my mom.
Oh my gosh, right?
I love her so much. She is as the kids say nowadays, she is mother.
I'm so happy to hear you say that because like it's been so conflicted what people think about her.
It's really interesting because I'm just now like I've been a fan peripherally of Kamala for so long. Mm-hmm. One thing that was really special to me about this show, and you touched on this when we put things together like this, we realize how much we have in common. Yeah. And so my daughter is biracial, black and white, but she saw me playing the much maligned, for good reason, Avengers video game. And the greatest thing about that game, and there's not a lot great about it, is Kamala's campaign and Kamala's story. And it's so great. And so she was just watching me play that on Xbox. And she was like, that's my favorite superhero, Daddy. She's 5 years old. And so coming out of that, like she got a Barbie doll with Kamala for the holidays. Oh, and we watched every episode together. And it's just like, she just absolutely adores her. And I think the one thing that was absolutely nailed in this show, and I don't want this entire episode to go by without saying it is the family aspects of this show.
Yeah.
It just like made me well up with tears every single episode.
Mm-hmm.
And Muniba, we love you forevermore.
Yeah, that is my mother. That is to a T, and Yusuf Uncle is my father. Like, I'm not just saying that. Like, that was just so much my mother. My mom and I, my mom hasn't seen the finale yet. We were going to watch it. They're on vacation right now. So they started the finale yesterday. And my mom was just like so overwhelmed and started crying as soon as like Muniba gave her the outfit.
Yes.
She just started crying and she was like,
Yes.
Do you want one? And I was like, yes. So we were discussing how we were going to get my outfit made from Pakistan. Yeah, but no, Muniba, I love how authentic. I cannot get over how much they felt like a mom and dad.
Yes.
Like, they felt like such a family. I don't know if it's just great acting and great writing, the combination of all of it. It just was so rooted in like realism. Nothing was forced. Nothing felt out of place. Everyone, to the point that everyone had critiques and they thought it was too much. Like, they were just done so well. They captured the fear of like, you know, being an immigrant parent and raising their kid here, to the fear of like, you know, just wanting to give them love and understand, to, you know, understanding and what that meant for them, and then just blindly supporting and being a Hulk for their child because that's what they wanted to do. Like, it was just so well done, and like I cannot get over how real it felt the whole time.
Yeah, and I related that too. Like my mom, like when I remember pre-K every morning, like we would watch the 87 Ninja Turtles series. And so like my mom would always tell me like, oh yeah, we're gonna do Ninja Turtles, and she'd get information wrong. And that whole Hulk scene where I was just oh my God, Mom.
Yeah. That's exactly it though.
Yeah.
Like, it's funny because like I'm creating content on TikTok now. My mom does not understand it, but like she knows that I've always loved like fantasy and fandoms and like it's run away with it. So she's like trying to understand. She's like, okay, so this is Batman. And I'm like, no, this is Captain America. Yeah. Like, she's just like trying super hard. So I related. I know you've probably seen my videos talking about it. It's just parents just trying to understand and be part of their kid's life. And it's adorable.
Yeah. One thing that was really impactful for me, but you obviously will give a much better perspective of this because there are so many tropes when it comes to immigrant parents. The thing that really blew me away and really got me in my feelings was when they found out that Kamala was Nightlight or Ms. Marvel. It was immediately overwhelming pride, and that really touched me, and it was such a reversal of what you've seen so many times in media with immigrant parents,
because that's really how it is. And like, again, I guess I'm saying this a lot from my personal experience because like I'm 33. I had my 20s with my parents where I was doing things that they didn't approve of, and I'm doing a career that they liked, but at the same time, like I always wanted to be a writer. They didn't understand it. So now that I'm creating content and like I write on the side, so I'm doing the medicine thing, but I started writing and doing things on the side still, right? So they're now trying to understand that part of me. And though they don't get it and they know that I'm not making money off of it, the way they tear up every time they read or they hear about it is just so, they just want me to be happy. Like the thing is that immigrant parents want you to be safe and they want you to be okay, but at the same time, they want you to be happy when you're safe and okay, right? So I think it was beautiful. I was actually making a comment about this. This is probably the first time where like I predicted that, okay, the immigrant parents should do this, and they followed through on it, because this is what I've experienced, that like they may be like a little strict, they may be like kind of hesitant, they might not trust things, but at the same time, if they know you're happy and healthy and okay, then they're going to be happy. And as a parent, that's what everyone wants, right?
Yeah, I think it's also just from a storytelling perspective, as a Spider-Man fan, it's the tropiest of all tropes of this whole secret identity of it'll kill my aunt if she finds out. I'm like, okay. So I was reading Blue Beetle recently. It's a DC book. I think that movie is coming out soon. They just wrapped filming, which is another great story. He's of Mexican descent.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. I've heard of him, but I didn't.
Jaime Reyes, really great book.
Okay.
But they kind of turned that trope on its head, and like the family knows about his secret identity, and it becomes like this integral part of their family relations,
I love
because
that.
almost like that great power, great responsibility thing is
Uh-huh.
like, Jaime, you've been given these powers. It is your job now to go and help people. And so like the family's in on it. I think that's like adds so much storytelling perspective rather than I'm just going to hide for my aunt again. Like,
And I'm glad you brought up it as a trope, because I may have definitely made a video about this. And like even Spider-Man ended up telling Aunt May at one point, and it worked out better for him whenever he did tell her, that I almost kind of feel like the whole like not telling my secret identity to my friends and family is almost like a cop out for more tension in the story. Like by creating that, they add like, oh, a little gimmick and a storyline on the side that like he has to hide his identity from like MJ and stuff like that. I feel like by choosing to tell, it just kind of gets you away from those like typical storylines that you expect that come with it, and it opens the door for bigger and better. Like with Blue Beetle, with Kamala, even with Spider-Man after he tells Aunt May, it allows for a different type of growth and development for the character, and a storyline for that character too.
also, you don't think we're hyped to your jig? Like you disappear every time something goes down? Like, come on.
It's at least in Marvel, they have like a better like secret identity. It's like in DC, it's just so bad. Like, oh, glasses, there we go.
Are there things, we touched on this a little bit, but are there things about the show that you didn't like or you would have liked to have been done differently?
The clandestine storyline was a little confusing.
It was a really weird deep cut. Something as like
Yeah.
a big Marvel fan that I knew nothing about. Like it was a random annual or something.
Yeah, and the funny thing is like it's rooted in the Marvel series enough that people know about it, but then they don't follow the storyline, and then they disappeared eventually. Like they're there for like 3 of the 6 episodes, and they just disappear. I don't know. I felt a little much. I will say like the plot was a little clunky because of them, and that is it. So I don't have any criticisms with the Jin angle, but my criticism is mostly that like that part kind of left me confused. I'm also a little confused with her power, but at the same time, I think it ended up playing out the way it was supposed to, because the finale and like the last 2 scenes that everyone's talking about kind of wrapped it up well together. So I'm okay with that part. Overall, I'm very happy, basically.
Another perfect segue. Now, the question all our listeners have been waiting for. Bruno says, I got chills.
Yeah.
Kamala, there's something different in your genes, like a mutation. Your instant reaction is what?
I know it was.
And here's the thing too. It was a throwaway line at first. You could be like, "Oh, it's just a cute little Easter egg," but then you hear no. I'm like, oh my god!
And they even paused it enough for you to hear
Yes.
it, and then she said her line. But it was like even like if you like, so many people missed it because of it.
Yeah,
and it's like I screamed though, because I wasn't expecting that or Brie Larson at all. So I was like. Yeah. I love that her response afterwards was very much like, it's another label. So it just
I love that line. I love that line so much.
Me too. I think it made it even better, because now it's like we don't even know what that means now. Like, does that mean because there's been so many theories since I've heard that like this means that there's going to be a new mutant show or movie coming out, like because with Comic-Con happening this weekend, they might announce it tomorrow, or that this means that like mutants are canon and now mutants are going to come out now, and it's just like there's been so many theories, and I feel like it was the perfect brewing pot basically of so many different tangents coming out. So I'm just excited to see what they do with it, because I feel like they just do it in there and now we can run wild with it essentially.
I was incredibly and disgustingly petty for 24 hours on Twitter because the 8 Inhumans fans like came out of the woodworks and were so upset, and I'm just like, really? Name 5 that are not Kamala and Black Bolt, because you can't name 5 of them, and the king of them can't name himself without destroying something. So
that's really funny. It's been, the tangential arguments have been very interesting for sure. And I know that Twitter was all abuzz after Miss Marvel came out, that finale episode came out.
Well, I am a self-fashioned like mutant super fan. Like,
for
one of those things that I read every single comic of was X-Men, and so
no way, there's so many.
I will say the mainline stuff. So
Okay,
I read
okay.
like the main titles and a couple of tangential ones, and then everything since the big reboot with House of X, Powers of 10.
Okay. Yeah.
And then everything since like the Krakoa era. And so,
wow, you've read the big ones. You've read
So I just say to my dear niece Kamala, we welcome you to Krakoa. Just come through the gates. We are so excited to have you in the mutant family.
I love X-Men. That is like my first introduction to Marvel. And X-Men is what I'm here for, basically. So I'm all about it. I'm just excited I still rewatch the original like movies and stuff. Those are so good. Everything except for the last one.
So we're scheduling this ahead of time, but as we're recording, we just had a couple of hours ago a lot of X-Men 97 reveals at San Diego Comic-Con. So
no way.
Yeah, so a lot of cool stuff to check out there. We'll get into that in a future episode, but that's
okay for sure. Yeah. I'm like really behind. I keep finding out like afterwards about things because there's so much happening in Comic-Con literally as we speak, so it's like hard to keep up with.
Right. Okay, so you mentioned this already, but your instant reckless speculations for the Marvels after that post-credit scene.
Oh my gosh, so much. Okay, so I've been thinking about this so much. I'm really excited for this project. Like I've never been so excited for this is the most excited I've been for a Phase 4 project since like WandaVision and Multiverse Madness. I think Kamala is where Bree was, so she's in outer space.
Yeah, right.
And that they changed spots. I'm convinced of it. And I'm convinced that Kamala is going to be the glue that brings Monica and Carol together because they're not on the best terms right now.
Yes, I love that theory. Yes.
Yeah. So, and then I don't know if there's going to be an invasion storyline because I know that Monica is doing secret invasions, but that Carol might be with, I don't know if Carol's with Nick Fury or Monica is. So like, there's definitely that plot line in the background too. But all I know is that Kamala's going to be the mentor that they need to like, mentee together. Mentee that they're going to mentor together, but she's also going to be like their glue that brings them together, just like she brought Muniba and Senna together. So that is my theory.
Also shouts to Nani. We love you.
Oh yes. Senna Nani was so good.
Oh my goodness. I love the entire family. Yeah.
I don't think there's a character that I don't like.
Maybe Zoe. Is that the
okay? That's fair. I can't forget. Yeah,
She came back around, I guess. But they have to give the white characters redemption.
Yeah, I kind of forgot she existed, so that's fair.
Oh my god, I missed a question. Perhaps the most important one. Who are you shipping Kamala with?
Okay, so first off, I'm really glad you brought up Anakin Skywalker because this will this will help the best. Obviously, Kareem is the best for her. Bruno is a freaking sweetheart. You don't get guys better than that because I will say this. So
you're Kareem too. You're Kareem too. Okay,
no,
I thought it was just me.
I'm actually Kamran, but it's the Anakin Skywalker shipper me. It's because I love the bad boy. It's because I love the bad boy. That's truly just it. Like I love I can go on and on this. Bruno is one of those characters that I have so much respect for, and I really appreciate his presence because he's such a good ally. He just is such a good friend, and there's just no one really like him in the MCU and in real life. So a lot of appreciation. Kareem is definitely the best one for her, hands down. Like he matches her beat by beat, and I completely agree that Kareem is the one that she should end up with. He is.
See, I go off of I go off of like compatibility profiles and stuff.
Oh no, and I think I made a video that's saying that it has to be Kareem because up until episode 5, I was all about Kareem. But they set up a perfect enemies to lovers with Kamran by that last episode. Like he was the bad boy trying to figure out himself. Felt like
and her little speech to him in the bubble. Oh my god,
that's what got me because I'm just like, oh no, and now I have to ship him because I'm like he's the perfect. He could have been good type of archetype, and now he's going to go bad, and it's always going to be like Kamala could bring him back to the good side. And it's the Anakin Skywalker shipper in me. I just can't help. As soon as I see a character like him, I'm just like, I have to go for him. So unfortunately, I'm team. It's my most toxic trait is that I'm shipping Kamran.
Well, Maria, thank you so much for your time. Where can our listeners go to support you and all your stuff? Plug all your plugs.
So the best way to plug me is through TikTok. Thank you so much for getting my name right. It is Call Me by the Same Maria. That is the best way to see all of the everything that I talked about today with all the fandoms, TV, especially Miss Marvel content, is through TikTok. I have a link tree connected to my Instagram and Twitter that's like slowly picking up. And yeah, TikTok is where I basically say it all and everything. So please follow me on there if you're interested to hear more.
Our special thanks to Maria for joining us this week. Be sure to go and support her work on TikTok and across social media at large. And when we come back from this, our final break, 2 more Nerd Commendations. All right, we are back for everybody's favorite segment where we give you the good stuff. You know it as... All right, Dave, I am super excited to talk about your nerd commendation because while I have not read it, it is by a writer that I trust more than most.
Yeah, so interesting story, man. As it turns out, we have talked extensively about the notion of what happens after the Obi-Wan series. And one of the things that we mentioned is that it would be cool to just not do an Obi-Wan season 2, but instead do a Darth Vader series. And I still believe this is a totally cool idea. So I went on to our friend Marvel Unlimited and started searching around to see if there's any Darth Vader comic books. And sure enough, since Marvel received the license back, they actually launched 3 different Darth Vader series. So let's see if we can follow through with this. The first Darth Vader series began in 2015 and was written by Kieron Gillen and had art by Salvador Larroca. This one takes place directly after A New Hope and chronicles Darth Vader's efforts to discover who the pilot was that destroyed the Death Star and take him out. And yeah, it's pretty much what you think. You get to see Darth Vader finding out that, he has a son, which is, pretty emotional stuff. The series lasted for about 25 issues, then was relaunched in a new volume written by Charles Soule. This actually jumped backwards in time and takes place directly after Revenge of the Sith and is sort of the early days of Darth Vader trying to establish himself. And then the most recent series, which I think just wrapped up or is about to wrap up, I'm obviously a little bit behind because of Marvel Unlimited, is written by Greg Pak and takes place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Now, I've read all of these, so each one is about 25 issues. So I've read 75 issues of Darth Vader. And what's my nerd commendation? Well, they're all decent. I can't say any of them are bad per se, but I will say that the best one by far, and the one that I wholeheartedly nerd commend, is Darth Vader by Kieron Gillen and Salvador Larroca. The aftermath of A New Hope, the emotional journey that he goes through. Darth Vader is a very interesting protagonist here, trying to figure out how to deal with the Emperor, who is kind of looking to maybe replace him if he can find something better, which plays into this whole idea of Vader starting to plot against the Emperor, and what that looks like, and how he goes around in secret. How does he try to find out about this pilot? What does he do when he finds out that it's his son? It's probably the most depth that Vader has in any of the 3 series. He's absolutely fascinating in this one, a great protagonist. The art absolutely sings Star Wars. It's pitch perfect. Larroca knocks it out of the park. So if you really, really want some Darth Vader content, like, this is the series to read. 25 issues on Marvel Unlimited, and it's an absolute joy to read. It's Darth Vader at his best. There's a crossover about halfway into it, I think, with the ongoing Star Wars title at the time called Vader Down, where they actually shoot down Darth Vader's ship, and he's stranded on this planet, and all the rebels are showing up and trying to take him out and kill him, so he's out of the way. And the crossover is absolutely awesome. There's a scene where he's surrounded, and the rebels are like, "You surrender, you're surrounded," and he says, "Yeah, I'm surrounded by fear," and he just kills them all. It's Darth Vader
and dead men.
Yeah, it's so good, man. It's absolutely perfect. So yeah, I mean, all the series are decent to some extent. I think Greg Pak is in the most recent Darth Vader, had the misfortune of like almost half of his series being caught up in a ginormous crossover called War of the Bounty Hunters, which I wasn't super fond of. So I feel kind of bad for him that he was stuck with this ginormous crossover for a huge chunk of a series. But yeah, man, Kieron Gillen and Salvador Larroca, 2015, Darth Vader, knocked out of the park. This is what a Disney Plus series should be based on.
Yeah, I can't say enough about how much I love Kieron Gillen's work. My previous nerd commendation of Eternals was great. We just came out, as of this recording, the first issue of Judgment Day, which was absolutely insane. It made me feel a lot of feelings. And then Salvador Larroca's art, I've always loved. Back to one of my favorite single issue comics ever, the To Have and to Hold Sensational Spider-Man Annual. And then also his work on Extreme X-Men and the various X titles. So this is absolutely going to the top of the list of my to read pile.
I'm glad to hear that, man, because I think you're really going to enjoy it. All right, so what are you nerd commending this week, Chris?
Well, I'm going way back to 2013 to a video game that has really always meant a lot to me and my family. And I recently repurchased it for my new Xbox console, and that is the Lego Marvel Superheroes. This is the perfect game if you are a nerdy parent and want to pass on your nerddom to your child. This, for me, has served as like a gateway for like almost all of my children, and playing this video game with them has been really, really fun and a really, really formative thing in our bond. So it is, as advertised, a Lego game with the Marvel superheroes, and a lot of these Lego titles are just really, really fun, kind of not overly complicated things, and it's just fun to sit back and relax and enjoy playing a game. It's not overly strenuous difficulty, builds teamwork, great local co-op games. And what I particularly love about this one is you can think about the timeline. 2013, the MCU was in full swing, but it was not overwhelmingly like venomous when it came to film rights. So, for example, the second game in this franchise, Lego Marvel Superheroes 2 and the Lego Marvel Avengers, while fun, they're very MCU-ified. There's no mention of the Fantastic Four. There's no mention of the X-Men or mutants at all. It is very sanitized. And so what I love about this first one is it's like peak Marvel. You have the Avengers, you have the X-Men, you have the Fantastic Four, like all fighting side by side. It's just absolutely great content. There's lots of... It's very, very expansive. Like this game... you unlock hundreds of characters via little missions and stuff. There's secret things to do. It's just like endless, hours of content that you can play with your family, have a good time. And if you are a big Marvel fan like I am, this is just a great, great, piece of media that you can enjoy. I absolutely love this game.
I'm pretty sure I have this game on disc down in my gaming room, and I never actually played it. I'm a big fan of those Lego games. The original Lego Star Wars games I played a lot, and there's really a lot of joy in those. So yeah, I'm fairly certain this is going to be a lot of fun. This is the one that is not tied in with the MCU. I know they did a Lego Avengers, right? But this is more like comic book based. Am I right on that?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, see, that's probably going to be totally my jam, because I really love when video game properties kind of go to the comics rather than to the movie versions. I'm just a comic book guy, what can I say? So, yeah, I definitely need to play this, man.
Yeah, the Lego Marvel Avengers picks up with the events of Age of Ultron, and then Lego Marvel Superheroes 2 is very Guardians heavy, which is fun and it's great. But like I said, they scrubbed any mention of mutants or the FF or anything like that because of the film rights pettiness.
Which sucked, let's be honest.
Right. But now in retrospect, we're all back together at least. But at the time, it was heavily annoying. All right, that wraps up another episode of the Nerd Byword. We thank you so much for coming along on this fantastic voyage with us. Be sure to like, subscribe to your favorite podcasting platform. You can find us anywhere podcasts are available, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TuneIn Radio, or our sexy new website, thanks Dave, nerdbyword.com.
And if you'd like to interact with us on social media, ask us questions, suggest topics for our show, you can find us on Instagram and on Twitter at NerdByWord, and individually at ThatNerdDave and at ThatNerdChris.
And also be sure to check our updated link tree link in our bios on social media, where you can find our Discord server, so you can slide on in and discuss all things nerdy with us, our TeePublic store with super swaggy merch, and then also links to just about everything you can think of regarding the show. And as always, stay well and stay nerdy.
The Nerd Byword is written and produced by Kris and Dave, two nerds with a love of all things pop culture. The podcast features music by Al Jimenez, with additional drops composed by Joe Biondi. Our show art is by Ashery Design. Find us at nerdbyword.com and wherever podcasts are available.